Well, here we are again for the Sunday conversation, and welcome aboard. Today, we have a good discussion on what is happening in our world because somebody called the foundation, actually from Boston, and it was a nurse from the ER, and she asked if we could help her to get some sort of a religious exemption from taking this vaccine because they want to fire her if she doesn't, or if she doesn't have some sort of a religious exemption. They gave her some papers to fill out that they wanted me to sign, which were basically that I was her minister and I would condone her not taking the vaccine. And I looked at it and I thought to myself, well, I think there's something more deeper going on here. And I thought, okay, well, let's just look into this. My father, after all, wrote the book, How to Conquer Suffering Without Doctors, back in the 70s. So I've been thinking about this. I called the attorneys, and of course, one of the attorneys is a real pro-vaccination person, and he's got a PhD. He says, I'm not just an attorney, I'm also a PhD, and these idiots, this and that, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, I haven't taken the vaccination. And he said, well, I'm sorry I said that, but, I have a PhD. And I thought, well, that makes you God, evidently, because listen, I got to follow what's in my heart. So I dropped the book off over at one of our board of directors, Charles Williams' house, and I asked him if he would look through the book, because I'm very busy right now preparing for our October seminar that we're going to be doing called The Reckoning. And we'll talk more about that as we get closer. In the coming weeks, we'll have some information available. But Charles looked through the book and found some stuff, and he sent me an email, and I said, you know what, we have to talk about this. And I'm glad that you did this. Thank you for doing this, Charles. But I'd like you to read this if you could.
Okay. It starts out, the foundation of human understanding is unique among churches in that it has only one guiding principle. In the words of our founder, Roy Masters, quote, since you were created to serve a higher purpose than your own, you must be prepared for that purpose by its author. No one can train you or teach you for that, because that is the way of understanding. And then I go on to say, Roy Masters wrote and spoke about this way of understanding for 50 years. How our nature works against it, what stands in the way of finding it, and the new state it will lead you to. How our nature works against it, quote, if you fail to realize this fact, your higher purpose, it is because you have a huge ego playing God, and that proud inclination has blinded you to realizing anything about the reality greater than you. What stands in the way of finding it? All your life, you have been educated and controlled by emotionalized information emanating from the pressure of your culture. The consciousness that faces the light is fortified by reason, which is powerful protection against the brainwashing of the world. The enlightened self screens out mental garbage effortlessly. It easily sees through fraud and deception. The new state it will lead you to, quote, the intelligent guiding light is your true teacher. Although he is intangible, you one day will know who he is because you will reflect his nature in your mind and in your physical structure, end quote. The foundation of human understanding does not have members like other churches. It has followers of this new way of understanding. On his path that leads them moment by moment, that is what the followers are. If our followers surrender to the will of culture or government, abandoning his guidance, they will lose their way in this world. Another quote from Roy Masters, a person who is made to doubt his true self and who is caused to believe the system that made him doubt himself is as good as dead.
That is just good stuff right there. I mean, it's very intuitive. And in a world of culture-motivated human beings, because if you look at what your motivation for believing certain things are, it's because, well, your pastor says this, or your father or your uncle or your group that you hang around with says this is the best thing to do. And instead of thinking for yourself, instead of asking your Father in heaven, what should you do, and waiting patiently for his answer, you just go along to get along. You're like, all right, whatever. I was at dinner last night talking with my son-in-law, and his mother said to him, which one of these vaccines do you think I should take? And he says, well, that's interesting. That's like asking me, what is the best way to be raped? And I was like, wow, you said that to your mother? He says, this is insanity. He says, she won't wake up. She just is going to follow the crowd. And I thought to myself, that's harsh. And then we start looking around us, and, I have a brother that has taken the vaccine, and he tries to convince me all the time. And I have other family members and people that are, married into the family, so on and so forth, that have these certain viewpoints, and then relatives of those family members. And he was saying that one of his, I think it was brothers' wives' family were so adamant that his family take the vaccine and get their children vaccinated that they literally were angry and yelling. And then, of course, another person speaks up and says, yes, one of the family members said, we should hold you down and inject you. This is where we're getting. This is how Nazi Germany happened.
Isn't this the precursor to the mark of the beast?
There you go. I mean, it very well could be. But you see what's happening through people that are mindless, that just follow the cultural ways. They're just mindless. And my dad wrote that book, The Hypnotic States of Americans. This was 11 years ago, but he's been talking about this stuff. This that Charles just read was from 1970 what?
1976.
So that was when the copyrights on How to Conquer Suffering Without Doctors. But
200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
there you go, right? Isn't that funny, right? I got an email last night from another nurse that says, I've been thinking about this. She says, I dealt with 6 people today that had COVID, and she hasn't had the shot. And she said, maybe I'm supposed to get COVID and let my body's natural resources keep me healthy. Maybe that's what I'm supposed to do. So she said, so don't worry about that. What is this? We're trying to find a exemption. She goes, don't worry about that exemption. She says, I think I'll be just fine. And I thought, now there's the kind of faith we're looking for right there, is that I've had it. And then I look back, and my daughter has been telling me about this. Let's see, what was it? I had to take something while I was in the hospital. And I was fine while I was in the hospital. I was fine the whole time. I kept thinking, why am I here? I don't know why I'm here. I just thought, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to watch and I'm going to experience this. This was back in April. And they gave me something that now they're starting to show that is deadly, right? And they told me this is what Trump took. Because I said, I want to take whatever Trump took. Remdesivir, yes, thank you. So she said that when they gave it to Africans, when they did a study, 54% of the people they gave it to died. They stopped the trial, right? So, and I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? Well, so on the Friday show I talked about, I said, now I have medication trauma, mental trauma. But I thought, that's okay. Whatever's supposed to be will be.
And I want to add that what this little statement is saying is that it's not so much the vaccine is good or the vaccine is bad or do this or believe that. It says find the way. And how do you find the way? And what Roy spent his life doing is telling people who said they found the way, well, wait a second, have you found the way? Why is this? Or why is that? Or why is this? And he was always asking the same questions to himself because his way was an up and down, crooked way. But he believed that you had to find the way, and your way was not someone else's way, it was the Father's way, and he will lead you. And just like I was led to write this and led back to these particular quotes, I wasn't finding it myself. I was led back here, and I had nothing to do but write this, and I never intended to write this like this, and it just happened overnight.
It's interesting because I know some of us that listen to this and are in this room have had the vaccine. Now, is it a death sentence? I don't think it's a death sentence. Is it going to take out many people? Will many people die from it? We already know that they are. You could get hit by a bus walking across the street, too, if you're not being aware, okay? So we have to learn from everything we do in our lives. And what I learned is that even if I make a mistake, if I'm living in the grace of God, if I'm walking the walk under the light of the Lord, and I'm working and doing my best, the best as I'm able to do each day, that I'm going to make mistakes, and I think God will make allowances for these mistakes. He obviously has for all of us. And I think, I had an interesting week about 2 weeks ago where my body was going through all kinds of weird stuff. I didn't say anything to anybody. And all kinds of weird things. And then it kind of ended, and I thought to myself, what was that? Because, you live your life and you have all these interesting little personal things that you don't really tell anybody about. Things that happen in the bathroom or things that happen at the airport. You never know where they're going to happen to you. And sometimes you end up in the hospital with them. But if you can make it through without going to the hospital, nobody ever knows, right? So I looked at this whole thing and I just asked God, what was that? What was that whole thing about? My body wasn't working right. Things weren't working right. Things weren't happening the way they normally do. And just all kinds of strange stuff. And I just went through it. And I came out the other side and I thought to myself, okay, that was uncomfortable. That was very uncomfortable. But I didn't hate it. Just like I didn't hate getting COVID. I didn't hate it. I just watched it. I did what I needed to. Sometimes that's take certain vitamins, maybe digestive enzymes or whatever to help aid the situation. Didn't want to go to the hospital, even though I thought at one point I might have to. But I looked at it and I thought, this is uncomfortable. This whole scenario is uncomfortable. Now, I'm very transparent. I watched my father my whole life, and all of his situations in his life, he was very transparent about. And he learned from communicating with you guys. He learned from telling the stories, and his own takeaway was he got to see it more clearly. So what I got out of my situation was my body may have been ridding itself of whatever poison that was put into me when I was in the hospital a few months ago. That's my conclusion now after thinking about what it is. Just like, have you ever gotten a splinter in your finger and your body builds a callus around it? That's happened to all of us, has it not? So if our body can build a callus around a splinter, I do believe also that if we're living right, it will rid itself of whatever poisons it needs to rid itself of on its own, because God creates an incredible creation called a human being with a mind and a spirit and a soul and a heart that beats and a brain that thinks, and an obedient person, an obedient to God, obedient person has a better chance of surviving anything. So my body went through this strange thing, and I came out the other side and I said, boy, that was uncomfortable. And then I thought about uncomfortable. Brings me to this next point. How many of us avoid uncomfortable situations, get angry and very pissed off at uncomfortable situations? Dealing with a spouse, dealing with children, dealing with business, and even business, because let's just stop right there. If you don't deal with things that are uncomfortable when you feel that uncomfortableness, if you don't stop and take a look at it, take inventory. All right, what's going on here? Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel uncomfortable about this business situation? Why do I feel uncomfortable about what my son or my daughter or my wife or my husband or wife just said? Something, it disagrees with us in some way. Food disagrees with you sometimes, right? What if something disagrees with you spiritually and you say nothing? What if something disagrees with you in business and you say nothing? What happens? You had a chance. God gave you a chance. He gave you that moment of, something is not right about that. And it was a calm, gentle little knowing, or you know enough that something feels uncomfortable. This is the sign that because we're so busy with the television playing in the background, the donut on your plate with a glass of milk and a coffee to follow it, to chase it down, whatever it is, because my son brought donuts this morning. It was really tempting. Anyway, whatever it is, it distracts you from that little uncomfortable moment that you had a chance to deal with that situation. So some of us, we feel very uncomfortable about the vaccine. That's that little knowing. We feel very uncomfortable. And so as we try to move forward, something holds us back. It's like hitting a wall. We hit a wall. I'm not going there. So people say, why? Why? It's this, that, and the other, and science, and a PhD, and here's fact and fact and fact and fact. And we're like, I don't know why, but I do know this. I'm not doing it. There's that little knowing that you got to follow in your life, okay? But here's the uncomfortable, interesting thing when it comes to things like business. A friend of mine told me, well, my boyfriend, he needed some money. So I told him, well, I'll loan it to you. I'll loan you the money. And, we need to drop a note so it's legit and you pay me back when you should. But we're boyfriend and girlfriend. So they got to the point where maybe they were going to do this deal, but, there was nobody to help them do it. And they're like, well, I'll just pay you back. Don't worry about it. And guess what? Now they're not boyfriend and girlfriend. So all of a sudden there's money owed that maybe it won't ever get paid back. And there was an uncomfortable moment when that person should have said, hey, I got to have this note. When you give me the note, I want to keep our relationship clean and pure. When you give me the note, I'll give you the money. I got to do this business-like. We have to be business-like. People make so many mistakes in life and business by not listening to that uncomfortable moment that is that little knowing that God gives you inside, or just a little knowing that your own intuition, maybe your intuition is tied to the Creator. Maybe that intuition said to you, there's a right way and not a right way. And I want to do things the right way. So these uncomfortable moments, they are there as warning signs, guideposts, whatever you want to call it, to help you not have to get to what is uncomfortable at this moment turns into a disaster the next. And that next moment may be 6 months away, a year away, 5 years away. The genesis of the problem was not listening to that little uncomfortable thing inside of you that was your inner voice. I thought, this is so important. So the friend that sent me the note that said, I don't really need that thing. I'm just going to continue on with my life. If they fire me, they fire me because they mandate this injection. And if I have to go on with my life, I'll figure out something else. It's funny because sometimes one door closes and another one opens. That's courage. That is courage right there, because you have to be willing to accept the unknown. But we willfully push through God trying to help us go to the next level of our life, the next place. So I tell you right here, with me, this uncomfortableness of having to try and, I hate to say even the words, fill my dad's shoes. I don't have to fill his shoes. His shoes are standing tall with all he taught. I just have to stand in my own shoes. And I have to speak my own heart that is going to have a different message. Last night at 1:30 in the morning, I got a nice email from a guy. And he says, I just want to send you a note to say thank you. I got it at 6 o'clock this morning when I woke up. He says, I had a real drug problem, and I called and talked to you and David. This must have been a year ago, because we were taking calls for a little while before the world changed a little bit for us. And he says, you guys really set me on my feet and helped me with my life. And it's like, we probably didn't say much of anything, but he needed somebody to talk to, and he needed somebody to just shine that lamp on the road a little bit in front of him. And he's taken the initiative, and his whole life has changed. His whole life has changed. And I thought to myself, isn't it interesting that something that I was uncomfortable with because my ego was uncomfortable? You see, there's two different uncomfortables you have to look at. Sometimes your ego feels uncomfortable and it keeps you from moving ahead. So that's why if you take a step back and you meditate on this whole situation, you'll be able to see the difference between your ego stopping you, and there is a difference, and only you can know what that is. It's like the moment, like my dad always says, the moment of truth. You reach that moment of truth. What is this? Is it my fear? Is it my ego? Is it my pride? So when I saw my uncomfortableness, I recognized that was my ego. My giant ego didn't want to reveal itself because, see, you folks can see things differently than the average person. You're on your journey to this awakened state that we all want to achieve. So you can see a phony versus a sincere person. And you guys had to see me being phony in the beginnings because I couldn't help myself, but I showed up and I kept putting myself out there. And I totally understand the teacher is the student at this point. Totally understand that. But the ego and the pride and the anger and all those things that want to keep you from moving to that next higher level in your life, those things will really raise their ugly head when you start moving in the right direction. I've said it before, when you're playing a video game and you get close to the pot of gold, the zombies start coming out of the walls. And that's really the truth. They do. Your demons will come up and start reminding you of everything. The journey of us, each one of us, the journey will be fraught with potholes and zombies and all kinds of things that will try to keep you from speaking the truth, from knowing the truth, from hearing the truth. And that's why you'll hear things that my father has said. As you become more enlightened and more mature, you will hear things differently. Even though you've heard them before, you will have the aha moment where the penny drops. Like for me, when I realize when I listen to myself on the Sunday talk or on the radio, sometimes I hear an idiot and I'm like, what did you say that for, you idiot? And I go, all right, well, that's the last time I'll ever say that. And then I hear things and I go, wow, where did that come from? Because it isn't me. It isn't you. It's tapping into the Spirit of God. And He wants to share His message through us to each other. Through us to you, through me to you, through you to me, through Charles and what he just found and read to you, through Roy to you. We are supposed to help bring each other up, not pull each other down. I'm just glad that I got to this uncomfortable part of my life, and I hit it a few times. I remember back in 2013, I think it was 2013 when my dad was sick, and I did a show that was called I Stand Ready. My wife reminded me of that I said, if anything ever happens to my dad, I stand ready. And I said it, and it was like the hardest thing for me to say, because I thought to myself, are you crazy? You're going to try and fill his shoes? Are you crazy? But I had to say it with my mouth. And in my father's book that we're getting ready to relaunch, How to Be at Peace with Your Problems, it actually says that you should read this whole book out loud to yourself. And I've never seen my dad say that. And he wrote that in 1965. And so I started reading it out loud to myself, and I thought, isn't that interesting? It has a whole new meaning. A whole new meaning when you speak out loud something versus reading it in your head. So when this book comes out again, which will be soon, you'll see that you need to read this out loud to yourself, and it'll kind of open up little pathways in your mind. So I know that speaking and doing this Sunday conversation and the Wednesday talk that I've been doing, it absolutely has helped me as a human being.
He's so right about that. When I'm reading some books and I don't understand it and I read it, I don't get it. I go, what? So then I read it out loud, and then it makes sense to me. It's really, I don't know, that's the way it works, though.
It's interesting. It's interesting to read out loud or to speak what you believe. A lot of times we're driven to argue, and when people argue, they argue with a whole different voice. They argue from a different position, almost from another, like from the monkey brain side. And you hear them arguing, and part of it is right. They're drawing from something that they believe in, and they're adding a poison to it, and they're trying to inject you with will, and they're trying to inject you with their truth. So it's almost a poisonous truth serum. Does that make any sense to anybody? Yeah.
100%.
That added anger or resentment or energy that you get stops people from hearing the true measure of what you're saying. I just had an experience last night. I took somebody to the emergency room, and they weren't listening to what the person was saying, and I was trying to help them. And they didn't care. They were, listen, we know how to deal with people. We know how. And I ended up leaving and saying, you're not listening to him. And I did it with anger when I left. And I called one of his relatives, and I said, you need to call down there and talk to him. And this goes back to a problem that I have. I always think that if I go to a person of higher authority, they're going to help me out of this situation. They're going to take my side in it and fight for me. But anyway, getting back to this call, I said, you need to talk to this person. so that they listened to him. And when she called up, it was her father. She called up and she said, they were really rude to me on the phone. I said, yeah. I says, I didn't say that, but I think I set that up for her with my anger as I left. Because oftentimes when people are ill, they are very distracted and they cannot tell you what the nurse needs to hear because they have all the stuff rattling around in their head that keeps them from the truth.
So I've experienced that, and my job for my mom and dad was to be their advocate. I needed to be there and make sure that what was being said was factually true and not born through illness or whatever it is. And a lot of times, as people get older, they forget things. And then they're not really telling a whole story. It's interesting. We're all dealing right now. We're all being called to deal with things and are being given opportunities, Roger, like you, to deal with something and not give in to the anger part of it. So I'll tell you what happened to me yesterday. Yesterday, I had an argument with my wife, and it was interesting, and it was something that had been burning down inside of her for 20 years. 20 years, so 2001. Here we are, 2021. So I did something that upset her 20 years ago. And it had been inside of there, buried down in there, buried alive. And it bubbled up. And here I am going into Home Depot to buy something. And all of a sudden I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, you've done this before. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't know what you're even talking about. You're knocking on the door of a house I don't live at anymore. Come on, tell me. She goes, you don't want to know. And then I'm like, I do want to know. And it was like, this thing went, I was like, what is wrong with this equation? But what it was is because it was unfinished business between a husband and wife. And then she finally articulated it. Like I said, my wife is finding her voice. But then all of a sudden, when they find their voice, all these bats start flying out of the belfry. That's right. Chuck said, Charles says, just be ready. It's true, but you got to also be willing to fess up. Yeah. I said, that was 20 years ago. She says, it doesn't matter. You never apologize. I said, oh my gosh, I've apologized so many times. I've lost count. And then I thought to myself, all right, shut up. Just listen. Let her have her say. So then I said, all right, tell me again. So she tells me again, and I look at it, and I said, did I do that? Do I own that? Should I own that? And she then says, and you never apologized. And I said, all right, I'm sorry I did that. I'm sorry I did that. And I will not do that again. And it was to me, not a big thing. But see, it isn't about me. It's about her. It's about how did it affect her? Whatever it is, you guys can drop the name of whatever you're guilty on that you've done with your spouse or children or whatever it is. It's these things that we say, that's no big deal. No big deal to me. It's no big deal if I'm, take a giant axe and drop it on your finger and they pop off, right? I just cut your fingers off. No big deal to me, but it's a big deal to you, isn't it? How do you sew those fingers back on? A lot of work. And will they work right? Maybe not. That's the relationship. Will it ever work right again? Maybe not. So guess what? When you are in a relationship, if you don't have a true heart for the other person, an unselfish heart for the other person, and a true care for that other person's soul like they're your own. I mean, when you're married, that's two souls together wrapped around the soul of Christ. That's a rope that is strong. If you look at a rope, it's 3 strands wrapped around and around and around. It becomes very strong. But if one of them goes bang, what happens next? Bing, 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 and it's done. What I'm learning how to do now is to recognize not that she is my wife. She is God's child. I am God's child. We are his children. He put us together to help each other through life. He put us together to work out all these little things that are from our childhood and from our adulthood and from our selfishness and from our anger and resentment and all the things that we go through life together. We've been together 40 years. It took 40 years for me to start having that pure love for my wife, proper love for my wife. So these things take time. It's like, and I keep coming back, I hope you guys have all Googled and seen what John Voight said on Tucker Carlson Today. He tells his story about how his whole life was just a real mess, and he was just going, why does it have to be so difficult? Why does it have to be so difficult? And he said, he put his finger to his ear, because we showed this to my son the other day. He put his finger to his ear, and he said, God spoke into my ear. It's supposed to be difficult. He goes, I heard a voice. It was the voice of God. And I realized, you're there. You're there. You're listening to everything that's said. Everything we utter in our hearts when we are in that moment of truth. The moment of truth. God is listening. He is listening. Problem is, we aren't listening to his little quiet voice. He'll give you the answer. He'll give you the answer in your heart if you are listening, if you are seeking for the truth. He'll give you the truth. And God said to him, it's supposed to be difficult. So I say to you all, it's supposed to be difficult, this life. Now, there are days when it's not and it's fun and you're fishing or you're walking and camping and boating and skiing. God gives you those days as well, those days to appreciate and see the beauty of this world. But when it comes to these relationships and there's a little difficulty, we want to run from that difficulty with our spouse. Yesterday, I faced it, and it's so funny. That could have been the end of my marriage, or it could have been, which it was, the beginning of the next day of my marriage, which went very nice. It was over. That whole episode that lived 20 years in my wife's psyche was gone. It was gone. It didn't exist. I didn't need to say anything else. It was over. It was a little petty thing, but those little petty things, like grains of sand, all add up in that hourglass, and one day it tips. One day it tips. And it's sad because we are so ready to just let it go. So many people get divorced, and so many people, just hate and hate and hate, and all they're doing is murdering themselves. It's like murdering your spirit. My sister said, we are murderers. And I said, what? She says, I'm writing a book called The Murder of Jiminy Cricket. Remember the Jiminy Cricket had the little angel on one side, or was Jiminy Cricket? That's what it was, the murder of the consciousness and the Jiminy Cricket. And we were laughing because it's so, childhood stuff. But it's so cute. We murder our own consciousness because we snuff it out. We put a pillow over its head to tell it to shut up. It's that little consciousness, the little Jiminy Cricket, the little consciousness that will help you to get to where you need to go in this life if you listen to it. Sadly, we just don't listen. Sadly, we've snuffed it out. But it's there, believe it or not. Just like that little thing that was burning in my wife. It was a dumb little thing. Dumb to me, of course, very important to her. But it was alive. So your consciousness is still alive.
I had an experience this week that brought me to tears, but in what we were talking about, and being willing and having the brave heart to see what it is in that moment where you're uncomfortable. What happened to me is that I was starting to react inside in a discussion I had with my sisters. It doesn't matter what the discussion was. It was something that I was very sensitive to as a result, because I heard myself amping up in the way I was projecting myself. Actually, what it was, not to say what the discussion is about, but my sister said, okay, you just don't talk anymore about it. Just don't talk. And that's what got me. That's what got me to amp up my force to, this is, this is my opinion, and allow me to speak. Don't shut me up, basically. So, I thought about it that night, and I had to apologize because I was wrong in my amping up. Had to apologize the next morning to one of my sisters that I saw first. And then I realized in that moment, just through that apology, I didn't understand why before I amped up. But I did understand after I spoke up and apologized. And then tears started falling. And what it was my dad would always say to me, children should be seen and not heard. And that could, I could cry about it now again, but that's so deep, that hurt in there. But I was so grateful to have that happen this week, to be able to see that and realize why I haven't really had a voice to to let it flow. I'm really chock-a-block, I'm really choked up and stuffed down in there, and that was I don't know what more to say about that, but that was big for me.
So last week we talked about this finding the voice, right? It's actually, the talk was called Find Your Voice, and I call that the muck. It's interesting how you live your whole life and something as little as children should be seen and not heard would affect you in that way for your whole life, until one day you're trying to speak your truth and somebody tries to shut you down. And then that thing that has been lying under these, decades of life, it comes up from the bottom, and really what it was the little child, like I said, the conscience down there that needed to be heard when it was a little child, and it came shooting up from the bottom. And even though you may not have done it right, Connie, even though, what was beautiful is that when you were willing to apologize for your outburst, that's where the love is. Because you love your sisters enough to be able to say, this is what I was trying to say. This was where my hurt was. And I'm sure you guys probably embraced, and it was. I hope it was a nice moment in time for you guys, because your sisters are wonderful.
It was a nice moment because I was able to express what was happening in that moment. I don't like being forceful like that, and I want to communicate. Right. I don't want to have this other stuff that makes them react.
It's the unspoken words that do more harm than good, because the fact that you got it out and you said it, now the air is clear about what you felt and what was going on in your family. And I read something this morning about how somebody said on National Siblings Day, I don't know why this bubbled up, right? We've all seen National Siblings Day, maybe not sent our siblings anything nice, because most of us don't really have a good relationship with them. But this person did, and they said, my siblings I love so much because they understand me. They know where I came from. They know what I had to go through to get here. We were on that journey together many a time, like you were with your sisters that were also, I'm sure, shoved down that same way. And we have these commonalities that are amongst us in our families that we either stay quiet to and allow that to rule our lives, or we speak up about what was wrong about it, okay? My sister the other day said something about my dad. There are a lot of people who always said my dad hates women and all these weird things. And my sister was always defending my dad. My dad doesn't hate women, look at me. And then one day, here on the radio recently, she said, I think Dad was a little bit wrong about, what he said about women. And we all the brothers went, what? Are you crazy? It's like, and so this whole big conversation happened amongst us in our, text world back and forth. And you know what? My dad was just like you, just like me, trying to get his ideas out, trying to convey certain ideas about what we'll call the Adam and Eve syndrome, and how we are all born from those two people, and the relationship and where it went wrong and how things go wrong. And I understand so much of it these days. And I will say that my dad used to be really tough on women. I remember him used to be really tough on women about a lot of things. And I used to always tell my dad, you got to chew on the men more, Dad. It's the man's fault. And we would have these great discussions about that. And my dad says, yes, it's true. The man, it falls on the man's shoulders. And he would always explain to me, if a man was just a true man, no matter what his woman does or did, it wouldn't be the same outcome, because he would correct her properly. the way Adam didn't correct Eve properly. But that's such a simple point. I don't know why it doesn't get made more often to this very day. I've talked to my brothers about it. I've talked to my friends about it. My friends would come bitching about their wives. I'm like, don't tell me about your wife. You tell me about what a lack of a man you are. Once you realize your part in this, we'll talk about your wife. So the one thing that I'm looking at differently, or probably shining a bigger light on, is man's responsibility in this world and his job in this world. And I understand women they play their role. Just like if you go all the way back to Adam and Eve, woman plays her role, man plays his role. But at some point, the man needs to man up.
But that's not believed in today's society either. It's 50-50. So no chief in the family makes for a lot of trouble. But that's the underneath belief system, I think, in these past, at least this past generation.
I do believe that there is an order in this world, and it's a very delicate membrane. It's more like 49 and 99.99999 for the woman and 50.0000001 to the man, because there's this order of things. Now, I also can tell you, if my wife is right and I'm wrong, it goes 90% to her and 10 to me. In other words, she was right, I was wrong. So it isn't about I'm the man and I'm right and it's my kingdom and there's the door if you don't like it. It's not like that. It's not about right. Well, it is kind of about right and wrong. It's about the proper order, correct, yes. And this is actually a whole nother discussion we could have about, because it's such a big discussion. But I realize that the onus is on me. The onus was on Adam. God created Adam, and he took one of the ribs and gave Eve life from Adam and said, I'm going to give you a helper in this life. Just like what Charles started reading this morning, the rest is on you to do what you believe is correct in your heart. The problem is man is so bloody selfish. All of mankind is such a selfish creature that left on his own, he screws it up. And he screws it up so bad, you know what brings him back? Pain. The pain of him stepping away from his Creator and not listening to his commandments and taking them as suggestions and going, well, I'm just going to do things my way. I'll show you how it's done, son. If you know what I'm saying, that kind of arrogance. But I'm finding this place with my wife that I always watch my mom and dad. I'm a study of my mom and dad. So for 60 years of my life, I watched my mother and father. And I always thought, I want to do this different. I want to do that different. I want to do this different, that different. Whatever those little things are, don't we all want to be a better version of our parents? I mean, shouldn't that be our goal, is to continue to be better and better and better throughout life and take the things that you see that were not so great and make them right? So I watched my mom and dad's relationship, and I would try and correct my wife and say, this is how we should be. This is how I should be. And if I'm wrong, tell me so. And so she's now starting to do that, and it pisses me off. But that's all right. What's another story again for another show? No, but I love it. It's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable when she speaks up to me and tells me something I did 20 years ago. And I'm like, let go. Let it go. No, it's unfinished business. So then it comes back to me. Do you want to let it be unfinished business? Or do you want to go ahead and put a lid on that and bury it? Let it be gone. Let it be dead. So it was uncomfortable, and I watched that uncomfortable, ugly pride come up and say, inside of me, it was, shut up. It was, I don't want to hear this. This is like you can almost hear these words inside of yourself. This is 20-year-old crap. I don't want to hear this. Or it's, yeah, that's the truth. That's the truth right there. Boy, this is uncomfortable. This is really uncomfortable. How can I get out of this? How can I run away from this? How can I hide from this? You can't. You can't. Men, women, you can't. When you've done something wrong, you need to own up to it, fess up to it. This is called repentance, right? If we can't learn how to repent here on earth before we get to the face of God, when, what do they call that, moment of truth or the reckoning, how can we possibly know what to do when the time comes when God, you're finally in front of God and he says, how do you plead? If you make a single excuse, game over. So I just stopped making excuses. I'm not going to allow it to live in me by making excuses for the wrong things or the stupid things or the things I had 50 reasons to do. Because we can all conjure up a million excuses, can't we? To achieve whatever we want, a car we want, a house we want, a relationship with somebody inappropriate that we want, or whatever it is. So I have to examine that. I have to examine, who do I want to put in my inner circle of life? Who do you want to allow into that circle of life where you're trying to cultivate the God consciousness, the people that pull you out of that God conscious space, the people that bring their poison in, that bring their world into your world, and all of a sudden you're no longer in control of your own life because your friend's there that influences you in the wrong way. Listen, I'm waking up. I am waking up to all the games the devil had his time with me for 59 years or so. And all the time I was buried under layers of life. And all of a sudden, just like with Connie, the little child in me spoke up one day and said, I'll be there. I'll do what's got to be done. I don't know how to do it, but I'm going to step up. And then when my dad asked me to step up, I had to step up. Do you know what? It's changed my whole life. It's changed my purpose. It's changed everything about me. I don't even care about things I used to live for. I look at them and I go, why don't I care about them? What happened? It just falls away. I don't have to try and do anything. It just happens on its own. It just falls away. All the things that were just, valueless things to the core of the man I'm supposed to be, that just fall away. It boils down to your sincerity. How sincere are you about your desire to want to hear God inside of you, speak into you his truth, shine his light into you, and guide you through your life in your decisions, in your interactions with others, the business dealings you make. It works in everything you do. The direction you take a walk. You walk out to the corner and you can either go across the street or turn to the left and walk down the left, turn to the right and walk down the right. You don't know why. You're like, well, let's go this way this day. And all of a sudden you find something you didn't know was there.
It's the willingness to see your own behavior when it comes right down to it, and have that brave heart to suffer that pain at that moment. And what makes one person that way and not another? I don't know. Maybe life's experiences, or, well, I don't want, I was brought up Presbyterian. There's a word, predestination, or your predestination, I don't know that, but I thank God every day that there's a little bit of light that I love, that wants to see myself and wants to make it back home in his loving arms. So thank God for that.
That is absolutely beautiful.
Isn't it a relief, too, where you're living a life and you have buried stuff that you don't see, and then someone that cares enough to point it out and you see it, and then you apologize for things that you didn't see, and it's a relief. It really is.
I will tell you what I see, and I see it in Connie today. Connie's one of our board of directors, Connie Derrick. Thank you for that too, Connie. And Charles, thank you for putting the time and energy in, and Christina Chandler and my sister Diane. The foundation needs those elders, you might say, to guide this young punk that's trying to find his way. And I know I learned from you, and maybe you learned from me, but we are going somewhere good, and I see it all the time. We are continuing my Father's work. We're the continuation of his work. We are what is left now that he has lived his life from beginning to end, left his legacy, and we are the legacy holders. We are the ones that now spread the word. God bless us one and all, because we had a guy that shined a lamp And we followed him, like Charles said, followers. We followed him, and he brought us back to a place we could see, okay, I got to continue on this journey to God, the same journey that Roy Masters was on, back to his Father in heaven. And he left this world. I have a picture of him meditating in a chair in my house that I found the other day. And I sent it to my siblings, and I go, here's Dad. And this is exactly what he looked like when he left this world, sitting in his chair, meditating. And he just passed away. I know that my dad left this world. He left his body behind, and his spirit continued on to the other side. It's funny, I have yet to have this mourning thing that I see a lot of people expect me to have. I'm like, good for you, Dad. You made it. And it's so awesome because he made it all the way until his job was done. When my mom passed and his kids are grown, he left. And now he handed it off to me, and I'm going to take it and do what I can do with it and use his teachings and learn some things myself and maybe improve on a couple little things. I don't know. I don't know what God has in store. Maybe clarify some things a little bit for myself, because that's all we can do is to try to find clarity. It's part of the journey. Charles and I talk all the time about things that we'll go back and forth. And, I find that I've talked to Charles and Diane, his wife, more about this stuff than I do with many people in my life. I go sit in their house sometimes and just talk, and Charles will send me little things, and I really do appreciate that, you guys. It's helpful. So even when you share, Connie and Fabian and, Al and Roger and Catherine even one day, and, Dave, any of our people that are come into this little studio where we have the live session, when you guys share from the heart, it teaches somebody, and sometimes it's me. So thank you. I get a lot of thank yous from people, but I thank you right back. And I think it's so important that we do this in our lives for each other.
I've wanted to say this for a while. If you're listening to this, you should know that you're a special person. You are not like the rest of these people in the world. You know that because things have happened to you in your life. And you have had these little moments, religious moments, aha moments, or whatever they were. And you are important to God, and He wants you. He's been telling you this all of your life. So wake up. The experiences that you have had have led you to where you are today, and it's not by accident.
It's true. It's funny how so many people are talking about religion lately, and I saw a meme just this morning, and I want to read it to you because it's so perfect. Because I have Mormon friends. I actually have one Muslim friend. He's a sweet guy, and I often wonder about his religion. I think to myself, that Muslim religion, that to me is, there's a lot of darkness there, but there's a lot of darkness in every, air quotes, religion. So here's what this says. Religion is a great way to focus on everything other than following Christ. It's a huge distraction, isn't it? It's like Christ is right in your heart. And it's like the journey inward is the one that we need to focus on. And we get so busy going to church and the hoopla and the sing-song of it and the, kind of all the stuff that goes along with it, that aren't we supposed to simply be following Christ? So followers of Christ. And people that, like Charles said, my dad says, we don't have members, we have followers. And we're all followers of Christ. So thank you guys for sharing your stories. You have all enriched my life. The people that send me notes from Boston and from the East Coast all over the place, and even all the way, across the globe to the other side in the UK. And I get letters from all over. Thank you. You can send me an email anytime, alan@fhu.com. We're going to have that seminar, and I think it's going to be a bang-up seminar. I've got some interesting people that I've met in my life that are going to come and speak. Just like Connie today was one of the teachers. That little story you told was beautiful because people could see that even though you didn't handle it right, Connie, when you spoke up and you were boisterous and your sisters probably went, what's gotten into her? The apology on the other side and the closure to it, you could have just left it, right? Just like I left what I did wrong to my wife. I left it for 20 years. You could have left it for 20 years, but now, see, you catch it. You see what you were trying to say and you spoke it with love this time. And then there's a healing for you and for your siblings as well. And so the Reckoning is our October 21st through the 24th event. Somebody says to me, what's it about? And I said, well, it's about time we have a reckoning. So we all need a reckoning. We all need one before disaster. Let's make sure that we're living our lives the way God intends us to and that we stop making excuses. Let's have a reckoning at Tall Timber Ranch. That's what we're going to do. So October 21 through 24, 2021, and we'll have information on it very, very soon. So keep an eye on FHU.com. Listen to the radio show, please. We're going to be adding more and more of Roy Masters' classic clips, and we're also going to be doing video version of that real soon. We're doing beta testing right now. I'm Alan Masters. Thank you again for supporting the foundation. See you next week.